Today I'm going to tell you a story so quiet. It echoes louder than gunfire. Out in the red rock heart of the Arizona Territory, where the sun bleeds into the dust and every shadow hides a memory, there lived a man who spent 5 years pretending he was nobody. It began with 3 strangers riding into Rock Junction on a morning too still for comfort. One careless word, one mocking laugh aimed at an old man on a porch. And everything he had buried for 15 years started clawing its way back to the surface. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun had barely cleared the red rock rim when Elias Harlan eased himself into the old rocking chair on the porch. The wood groaned under his slight weight, a familiar complaint after all these years. He settled the threadbare blanket across his lap, folded his hands on top of it, and let the tremor come. It always came in the mornings. Small, insistent waves that traveled from his wrists to his fingertips, like the aftershocks of some long-ago thunder. Rock Junction lay quiet below him. Dust hung in the air, golden in the slant light, carrying the faint smell of sagebrush and yesterday's wood smoke. A few early risers moved along the single street. Old Man Harlan Gibbs sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store. Widow Eliza Thorne already unlatching the saloon doors. The wind chimes on her porch gave a single, soft clink, then fell silent again. Tommy Whitaker appeared first, as he did most mornings, bare feet kicking up little puffs of dirt. The boy was 12, going on 30, all sharp eyes and restless energy. He dropped cross-legged on the top step without asking permission, and looked up at Elias with the same mixture of awe and curiosity he'd worn since the first time he'd asked for a story. "Morning, Mr. Harlan," Tommy said. "You gonna tell about the time the snake crawled inside the boot again?" Elias managed a thin smile. "Maybe later, son. Got a mind to sit quiet a spell first." Tommy nodded. Content for now, 2 other children drifted over, smaller ones too shy to speak, and Elias reached into the pocket of his vest. His fingers fumbled the waxed paper bag. The tremor made the candies rattle like dice in a cup. He dropped 3 into Tommy's open palm, then 1 each to the others. The boy's hand closed around them carefully, as if they might break. "How come your hands shake like that?" Tommy asked, voice low, almost apologetic. "Pa says it's just old bones, but Ma says sometimes it's something else." Elias looked down at his own hands. The knuckles were knotted, the skin thin and spotted. He could feel the pulse beneath the tremor, steady despite everything. "Old bones will do that," he said softly. "Nothing more to it." He didn't look up right away. If he had, he might have seen the 3 riders pull their horses to a stop in front of the saloon. Dust billowed around the animals' legs and drifted across the street like smoke. The men didn't dismount immediately. They sat tall in the saddles, hats low, watching the town the way coyotes watch a dying calf. One of them laughed, short, sharp, without humor. The sound carried on the still air and landed somewhere near Elias's porch. Tommy's head turned toward it, then back to Elias. "Strangers," the boy whispered. Elias kept his gaze on the candies still in his palm. He felt the old reflex stir somewhere deep, the tightening in his shoulders, the sudden clarity that used to come before a draw. He pushed it down, hard. "Lots of strangers pass through," he said. "Most of them keep moving." Tommy didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. Instead, he popped a candy into his mouth and crunched it between his teeth. Elias's eyes flicked once, only once, toward the saloon. 3 horses, 3 riders. The lead man wore a black hat with a silver band that caught the light. He swung down from the saddle now, boots hitting the boards with deliberate weight. His 2 companions followed, None of them tied their horses. They simply left the reins hanging, a small arrogance that said they didn't expect to be staying long or didn't care if the animals wandered. Widow Eliza appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She glanced toward the newcomers, then toward Elias's porch. Her expression didn't change, but Elias knew that look. She'd seen the clippings once, years ago, folded inside his Bible. She'd never spoken of them. She never would. The lead rider, Cade Blackjack Harlan, spat tobacco juice into the street. He turned slowly, scanning the town, and his gaze settled on the old man in the rocking chair. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind moved the sagebrush. A horse snorted. Then Cade raised his voice, loud enough to carry across the dust. "Old man over there," he called. "You look half dead already. How come you're still sitting in my sunshine?" The words landed like stones in still water. Tommy stiffened. The smaller children edged closer to the steps. Elias kept rocking, slow and even. His hands tightened on the blanket, just enough to hide the tremor. He didn't answer. Cade laughed again, that same short bark, and turned back to his men. They went inside the saloon. The doors swung shut behind them. Tommy let out a breath he'd been holding. "He talking to you, Mr. Harlan?" Elias reached over and laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. The touch was light, steady for the first time that morning. "Some men talk to hear their own voice," he said. "Don't pay it no mind." But Tommy's eyes were wide, searching Elias's face for something the old man wasn't ready to give. Elias looked past the boy, past the porch rail, to the saloon doors that had just closed. Somewhere inside, 3 strangers were already asking questions. He could feel it the way a man feels a storm coming long before the clouds show. The rocking chair creaked once more. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the tremor return. It was going to be a long day. The next morning came hard and bright, the kind of Arizona sun that bleached bones and made shadows sharp as knives. Elias Harlan had barely slept. He'd lain in the narrow bed inside the little house, listening to the creak of the timbers settling and the distant howl of a coyote that never quite faded. By the time the light reached the porch, his hands were already trembling again. Not from age, but from the slow burn of something he'd tried to bury 15 years deep. He took his usual place in the rocker, blanket across his knees, eyes half-lidded against the glare. The street looked the same. Gibbs sweeping in front of the store, a wagon creaking past with empty barrels, Widow Eliza shaking out a rug on the saloon porch. But the 3 horses were still tied outside her doors. They hadn't moved. Tommy Whitaker appeared later than usual, walking slower, kicking at pebbles instead of running. When he reached the steps, he didn't sit right away. He stood there, arms folded tight across his chest, staring at the ground. "Morning, Mr. Harlan," he said, quieter than yesterday. Elias nodded. "Morning, son." The boy hesitated, then climbed the steps and sat on the top one, back to the street. Elias could see the faint red mark on his cheek, barely a bruise but fresh enough to sting. "Had words with your pa?" Elias asked gently. Tommy shook his head. "No, just them fellas in the saloon. One of 'em, big one with the black hat, told me to quit hanging around old men who look like they're already half in the grave." He swallowed. "He pushed me. Not hard, but he pushed." Elias felt the old tightness coil in his chest. He kept his voice even. "Some men push because they can. Doesn't make it right." Tommy looked up then, eyes searching. "Why didn't you say nothing yesterday, when he called you out?" The question hung there, small and heavy. Elias opened his mouth, closed it again, He could feel the weight of the Colt .45 tucked inside the inner pocket of his coat. Cold against his ribs, his fingers brushed the worn leather of the holster through the fabric. The tremor got worse for a second. He hid it by folding his hands tighter. "I'm just an old man, Tommy," he said at last, the words tasting like dust. "Ain't got much fight left in me." The lie sat between them like smoke. A shadow fell across the porch steps. Rusty Spur Callahan sauntered past first, spurs jingling with every deliberate step. He stopped long enough to spit a dark stream of tobacco juice that landed an inch from Elias's boot. The smell of it, bitter, wet, drifted up. "Nice morning, Grandpa," Rusty drawled, not looking at him. "You got any gold hid under that blanket? Folks say old men keep their best stuff close." Elias didn't move. "Ain't got nothing worth taking," he replied, voice soft and shaky. "Just stories and hard candy." Rusty laughed once, low and mean, then kept walking. A minute later, Caleb Kid Rollins came the other way. Slower, eyes flicking toward Elias and then quickly away. He didn't speak, but he paused at the bottom step long enough for Tommy to tense. "Keep away from the old man, kid," Caleb muttered, barely loud enough to hear. "Ain't healthy." Tommy's shoulders hunched. He didn't answer. From across the street, leaning against a post outside the saloon, Cade Blackjack Harlan watched it all. His black hat was tipped back now, silver band glinting. He didn't smile. He just watched, like a man sizing up a horse he planned to break. Elias felt the gaze like heat on the back of his neck. He kept rocking, slow and even, but inside the tremor had spread to his shoulders. Memories flickered unbidden. The smell of gunsmoke in a narrow canyon, the weight of a badge he'd pinned on and never unpinned until the day he walked away. He pushed them down again, harder this time. Tommy stood up suddenly. "I gotta go," he said, voice cracking just a little. "Ma wants me home." Elias reached out, slow, and touched the boy's arm. "Tommy." The boy stopped. "You don't have to stay away," Elias said quietly. "Not on account of me." Tommy looked at him a long moment, then nodded once and hurried off down the street, shoulders still tight. Elias let his hand fall back to the blanket. The tremor was bad now, fingers jumping like they had a mind of their own. He pressed them flat against his thigh and stared at the 3 horses still tied outside the saloon. Rusty and Caleb made another pass 10 minutes later. This time, Rusty stopped dead in front of the porch, boots planted wide. "You hear me earlier, old man?" he asked. "About the gold?" Elias met his eyes for the first time. "I heard." Rusty grinned. "Good, 'cause the boss is getting curious. Says you don't look right. Says maybe you're hiding something worth finding." Elias kept his voice light, trembling on the edges. "I'm just an old man, son. Y'all got me mixed up with somebody else." Rusty snorted and walked on. Cade hadn't moved from the post. When Rusty reached him, the two spoke low. Cade's eyes never left Elias. The sun climbed higher. Heat rose from the dirt in shimmering waves. Elias sat there until his back ached, and the tremor eased into a dull ache. He told himself it would pass. He told himself if he stayed small, stayed quiet, they'd get bored and ride on. But deep down, he knew better. Late in the afternoon, Cade finally stepped off the boardwalk and crossed the street. He walked slow, boots kicking up little puffs of dust. When he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he stopped and looked up. Elias met his gaze. For a long beat, neither spoke. Then Cade smiled. Slow, cold, certain. "Tomorrow," he said, voice carrying just enough to reach the porch. "I'm going to teach you some respect, old man." By taking whatever you got hidden in that little shack of yours. He turned away without waiting for an answer, spurs ringing as he went back to the saloon. Elias sat very still. The wind moved through the sagebrush, carrying the faint smell of tobacco and horse sweat. His right hand slipped inside the coat again, fingers closing around the grip of the Colt. For just a second, the tremor stopped. He let go. The chair creaked once as he leaned back. Somewhere down the street, Tommy Whitaker's footsteps faded into the afternoon quiet. Elias closed his eyes. Tomorrow was coming faster than he wanted. The Thursday afternoon heat pressed down on Red Rock Junction like a heavy hand. Dust devils spun lazy circles in the middle of the street, and the air smelled of hot pine pitch and horse manure baked into the ground. Elias Harlan walked slower than usual down the boardwalk, cane tapping lightly. Not because he needed it, but because the rhythm helped keep his breathing even. The tremor in his right hand had quieted to a low hum, but he could still feel it waiting, coiled under the skin. He pushed through the saloon doors. The familiar smells hit him first. Spilled whiskey, old tobacco, fried onions from the kitchen, and the faint, metallic tang of gun oil. Widow Eliza Thorne stood behind the bar, wiping glasses with a rag that had seen better days. She looked up when he entered, and something passed between them. Quick, wordless, the way two people who've known each other too long don't need words. "Your stew's on the stove," she said, voice low. "Sit wherever you like." Elias nodded and moved to his usual table in the corner, back to the wall, face to the room. The place was half empty. A couple of ranch hands nursing beers, old man Harlan Gibbs playing solitaire with a worn deck, and three men who didn't belong. Cade Blackjack Harlan sat sprawled in the center of the room, boots up on a table, silver band on his hat catching the light from the high windows. Rusty Spur Callahan leaned against the bar, spurs jingling every time he shifted. Caleb Kid Rollins sat across from Cade, young face tight, eyes flicking toward Elias the moment the old man sat down. Widow Eliza brought the bowl over herself. Steam rose from the thick stew, beef, potatoes, carrots, and the smell almost made Elias forget the knot in his stomach. She set it down gently, then lingered a second longer than necessary. "You sure about this?" she murmured, barely moving her lips. Elias looked up at her. "I'm sure about the stew." She gave him the smallest nod and went back behind the bar. Cade's voice cut through the quiet like a knife through rope. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence. The town's favorite porch sitter." The ranch hands glanced over, then quickly away. Gibbs kept his eyes on his cards. Elias dipped the spoon, blew on it once, and took a slow bite. The meat was tender, the broth rich with pepper. He chewed deliberately. Cade laughed, short and sharp. "You hear that, boys? Man's got manners. Eats like he's at a church social while the rest of us are starving for entertainment." Rusty pushed off the bar and sauntered closer. "Maybe he's saving his strength for something special. Old men got secrets, right? Gold, guns. Stories nobody wants to hear twice." Elias kept eating. The spoon scraped the bowl in the silence that followed. Cade leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You know what I think, old man? I think you're hiding something, and I think this town's starting to wonder the same thing." Widow Eliza's rag stopped moving on the glass she held. Elias set the spoon down. "I'm just here for Thursday's stew, son. Same as always." Cade's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always. Funny word. Means you've been doing the same thing a long time. Makes a man curious." The doors swung open. Tommy Whitaker slipped inside, hat in hand, eyes wide. He spotted Elias and started toward the corner table, then froze when Cade's head turned. "Where you going, boy?" Cade asked, voice deceptively mild. Tommy swallowed. "Just to see Mr. Harlan." Cade's boot came off the table with a thud. "This ain't a nursing home. Run along." Tommy hesitated, glanced at Elias. Elias gave the smallest shake of his head, barely a movement. But Tommy took another step forward anyway. Cade stood up fast. The chair scraped back hard. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Tommy by the collar, and shoved him toward the doors. Not hard enough to hurt bad, but hard enough to make the boy stumble and catch himself on the frame. "Out," Cade said. Tommy's eyes filled. He looked back at Elias, cheeks burning. "Mr. Harlan, why don't you—" The words cut off as Cade gave him another push, this one sending him out onto the boardwalk. The boy caught the rail, righted himself, and stood there a second, breathing hard. Then he turned and ran. The saloon went quiet again. Elias stared at the empty doorway. His spoon lay forgotten in the bowl. Widow Eliza moved then. She walked around the bar, slow and deliberate, and stood beside Elias's table. She didn't touch him, didn't speak to him. She just looked at Cade. "That boy's 12, she said quietly. "He's got no part in whatever this is." Cade turned to her, amused. "Then tell him to stay away from old men who pretend they're harmless." Widow Eliza's eyes flicked to Elias, just once, quick and knowing. She had seen the yellowed clippings years ago, folded inside the Bible he kept on the shelf. She had never asked. She never would. But the look said enough. Outside, Sheriff Josiah Kane stood on the boardwalk, arms folded, watching through the open doors. He didn't step inside. He didn't speak. He just watched. Elias felt the tremors start again, deeper this time, spreading from his hands to his chest. He pressed his palms flat on the table to hide it. Cade walked back to his table and sat down. He picked up his glass, took a slow drink, then leaned toward Caleb. The kid's face was pale. He glanced at the doorway where Tommy had disappeared, then back at Cade. "Sarge," Caleb said, voice low, almost reluctant. "That kid, Tommy. He told me earlier the old man used to be somebody dangerous. Said he heard it from his pa." Cade's eyes narrowed. He looked across the room at Elias. Elias met his gaze. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint tick of the clock above the bar and the low murmur of the wind outside. Cade set his glass down carefully. "Tomorrow," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "We're going to find out just how dangerous." He smiled then, slow, certain. Elias picked up the spoon again. His hand shook so badly the broth sloshed over the rim. He set it down without taking another bite. Widow Eliza touched his shoulder once, light as a breath, then walked back to the bar. Outside, the sun dropped lower, stretching shadows long and black across the street. Tommy Whitaker's footsteps had long since faded. Elias sat very still, staring at the half-eaten bowl in front of him. The tremor didn't stop. The lamps in Widow Eliza Thorne's saloon had been lit for hours by the time Elias Harlan pushed through the doors that Thursday evening. The sky outside had gone the color of bruised plums, and the first cool breath of night carried the sharp scent of creosote and distant rain. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the low murmur of men who had nowhere else to go. The usual Thursday crowd, ranch hands, a traveling farrier, old man Harlan Gibbs, was thinner tonight. Everyone felt the shift in the room the moment Elias stepped inside. Cade, Blackjack, Harlan sat dead center, chair tipped back, boots planted on the table like he owned the wood beneath them. Rusty Spur Callahan stood to his left, one hand resting easy on his gun belt. Caleb Kid Rawlins was on the right, younger, quieter, fingers twitching near his holster as if they didn't know what to do with themselves. The three of them had claimed the best light in the place, the hanging lamp directly above throwing hard shadows across their faces. Elias paused just inside the doors. The tremor in his hands had eased to nothing more than a faint pulse. He felt it still, but it no longer owned him. He walked to his corner table without hurry, cane tapping once, twice, then set it against the chair back and sat. Widow Eliza came over with a bowl of stew herself. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flicked toward Cade and back to Elias in the space of a heartbeat. "Eat slow," she said under her breath. "They've been waiting." Elias nodded once. "I see that." She lingered a second longer than she should have, then turned away. As she passed Cade's table, he reached out and caught her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her cold. "Easy now, widow," Cade said, voice low and amused. "We're just visiting with your favorite customer." Eliza pulled her arm free without a word. Cade let her go, but the push he gave her shoulder sent her stumbling a step. She caught herself on the edge of a table, breath catching. No one moved to help her. The room had gone quiet enough to hear the wick sputter in the lamp. Elias watched it all without turning his head. He picked up the spoon, dipped it into the stew, and brought it to his lips. The broth was warm, familiar, but it tasted like ash tonight. Cade leaned forward. "You're a creature of habit, old man. Thursday stew, corner table, same damn bowl every week. Makes a fella wonder what else you keep regular." Elias chewed slowly, swallowed. "Habit's all an old man's got left." Rusty chuckled. Caleb didn't. Cade stood up. The chair scraped back with a sound like breaking bone. He walked over, slow, boots deliberate on the plank floor. When he reached Elias's table, he stopped, looming. His shadow fell across the bowl. "I know who you are," Cade said, voice dropping so only the two of them, and maybe Widow Eliza, could hear it clearly. "Or who you used to be. Deadshot Harlan, the man who cleaned out half the territory before he vanished like smoke. And now, here you sit, playing at being nothing." Elias set the spoon down. His right hand rested on the table, steady. No tremor. He looked up at Cade without blinking. "You got the wrong man, son," he said quietly. "I'm just here for my stew." Cade's smile was thin. "Wrong man, huh?" He drew his revolver in one smooth motion, the barrel coming up to rest an inch from Elias's forehead. The click of the hammer was loud in the hush. "Prove it. Show me you're just an old man with a bowl of stew." The room froze. Widow Eliza's hand went to her mouth. Outside the front window, Tommy Whitaker's face appeared, pale, eyes wide and red-rimmed, pressed against the glass like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Elias didn't flinch. He felt the cold muzzle kiss his skin, felt the weight of every eye in the room. Memories rose unbidden. The smell of black powder in a dry wash 15 years ago, the kick of a Colt in his palm, the way a man's eyes changed when the light left them. He pushed them down. Not yet. "I'm just an old man," he repeated, softer this time. "I only want my stew." But under the table his left hand had already moved. Slow, careful, sliding inside the open edge of his coat until his fingers closed around the familiar grip of the old Colt .45 hidden there. The metal was cool, worn smooth by years of waiting. He didn't draw, not yet. He just held it, thumb resting light on the hammer. Cade searched his face, looking for fear, looking for the lie. He didn't find either. For a long second, the only sound was the faint hiss of the lamp and Tommy's muffled sob from outside. Then Caleb stepped forward, one small, uncertain step. His hand, which had been hovering near his own gun, dropped slowly to his side. He looked at Elias, not with challenge, but with something closer to confusion, something that might have been recognition. Cade noticed. His eyes flicked to the kid, then back to Elias. The revolver stayed steady, but the certainty in his face cracked just a hair. He lowered the hammer with a soft click and holstered the gun, stepped back one pace. "Tomorrow," Cade said, voice loud enough for the room again. "I'm coming for whatever you got hidden in that shack of yours, and if you don't give it up easy, I'll burn the damn place down with you in it." He turned away, motioning to Rusty and Caleb. The three of them walked out without another word. The doors swung shut behind them. Widow Eliza let out a breath she'd been holding. She moved to Elias's table, set a fresh cup of coffee down beside the untouched stew. "You all right?" she asked. Elias looked at the coffee. Steam rose in slow curls. His hand came out from under the table, empty now, and rested on the tabletop. Still steady. "No," he said quietly, "but I will be." Outside, Tommy's face was still pressed to the window, tears streaking the dust on the glass. He didn't knock. He didn't come in. He just stared, as if waiting for something to make sense. Elias met the boy's eyes through the pane. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Elias looked away first, picked up the spoon, and took another slow bite of stew. The lamp above flickered once. Somewhere down the street, a horse snorted in the dark. Tomorrow was no longer a possibility. It was a promise. The morning after the saloon came cold and gray, the kind of dawn that made the red rocks look like old blood. Elias Harlan woke before first light, the narrow bed cold beneath him. He sat on the edge for a long time, elbows on knees, staring at the floorboards. The tremor was back in his hands. Not violent, just persistent, like a low fever that wouldn't break. He dressed slowly, pulled on the same worn coat, tucked the Colt inside where it belonged, and stepped out onto the porch. Tommy Whitaker was already waiting at the bottom of the steps, hat pulled low, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The boy hadn't slept much. The shadows under his eyes were dark as bruises. "Thought we'd ride out to the Wilson place," Elias said quietly. "See if they need a hand with the fences. Been meaning to." Tommy nodded without speaking. He didn't ask why. He just untied the two horses Elias kept in the lean-to, old, steady animals that asked no questions, and swung up into the saddle. They rode out together in silence. The only sounds the creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves on packed dirt, and the occasional cry of a mourning dove. The trail wound past scrub juniper and sage, the air sharp with the smell of dust and coming rain. Elias kept his eyes on the horizon, but his mind kept drifting back to the saloon. The cold muzzle against his forehead, Widow Eliza's stumble, Tommy's face at the window. He hadn't drawn. He hadn't needed to. Not yet. But the weight of not drawing sat heavier than any gun. They crested the low rise above the Wilson spread, just as the first thin column of smoke appeared against the pale sky. It rose black and oily, twisting like something alive. Elias reined in hard. Tommy's horse danced sideways, nostrils flaring. "Mr. Harlan." Tommy's voice cracked. Elias didn't answer. He urged his mount forward at a trot, then a canter, the wind whipping his coat. The smell hit them before they reached the yard, charred wood, burned hair, and something worse, something human. The Wilson house was gone. What remained was a blackened skeleton of beams and adobe, still smoldering. The barn had collapsed in on itself. A few chickens wandered dazed through the ashes, feathers singed. In the center of what had been the dooryard lay the bodies: Old Man Wilson, his wife, their grown son, the cook who'd always slipped Elias an extra biscuit when he passed through. They'd been lined up against the fence posts, shot once each through the chest. Clean work, deliberate. Tommy made a small, choked sound and slid from the saddle, knees buckling. He retched into the dirt, shoulders heaving. Elias dismounted slowly. His boots crunched on broken glass and charred wood. He walked among the dead without hurry, face blank. But inside, something old and familiar cracked open. These people had given him shelter 5 years ago when he'd ridden in half dead from the desert, no questions asked. They'd fed him, mended his coat, never once pried about the scars or the way his hands shook back then. He knelt beside the kitchen table, what was left of it. The top was scorched black, legs splintered, but one corner remained intact. A single playing card lay face up in the ash, the ace of spades. Someone had written across it in careful, slanted script, the ink still dark and wet-looking. 3 days. Eagle. No, Deadshot. Mercy will die with you. Elias picked it up between thumb and forefinger. The card felt warm, as if it had been held too long by a living hand. He folded it once, slipped it into his vest pocket without a word. Tommy staggered over, wiping his mouth with the back of his sleeve. Who did this? Elias stood. Man named Rufus Ironhand Slade. He's come for me. Tommy stared at him, eyes wide and shining. Because of what happened in the saloon? Because you didn't? No. Elias cut in gently. Because of what happened 15 years ago. Before you were born. Before any of this. He looked at the bodies again. The wind moved through the ruins, stirring ash into small gray whirlwinds. Somewhere, a horse whinnied. Probably one of the Wilsons that had broken free and was now loose on the ridge. Footsteps pounded behind them. Diego Vargas came running up the trail, hat gone, face streaked with sweat and soot. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, lanky and terrified. "Mr. Harlan," he gasped, sliding to a stop. They said you'd be out here. Rufus Slade. He rode in last night with maybe 30 men. They hit the Wilson place first. Said it was a message. Said mercy is weakness. Said you'd understand. Elias nodded once. I understand. Diego's eyes darted to the bodies, then away. Folks in town are scared. Some are talking about leaving. Others are loading rifles. Tommy looked up at Elias, voice small. What do we do? Elias didn't answer right away. He stared at the smoldering timbers, at the ace of spades now heavy in his pocket, at the boy beside him who had seen too much in one morning. He thought of Widow Eliza's stumble, of Caleb's hand dropping from his gun in the saloon, of the way the tremor had left him last night, when the muzzle touched his skin. He thought of the life he'd tried to build here. Quiet, small, safe. It was gone now. Not because he'd drawn, but because he hadn't. I need to talk to Caleb, Elias said finally. In secret. Tonight, after dark. Tell him to meet me behind the livery. No one else. Tommy nodded, swallowing hard. Diego shifted from foot to foot. Sheriff's riding out. He'll be here soon. As if summoned, hoofbeats sounded on the trail. Sheriff Josiah Kane appeared around the bend, Deputy Eli Crow behind him. Kane reined in hard, face grim under the brim of his hat. Elias, he said, voice rough. We got word. Slade's gathering more men, 30, maybe more. Word is he's coming straight for town. Wants everyone to see you fall. Wants to prove whatever lesson he thinks he's teaching. Elias met the sheriff's eyes. He's not teaching. He's proven to himself. Kane glanced at the bodies, then back. Town's starting to panic. Some want to run, some want to fight. Either way, this ain't just your trouble anymore. Elias looked out across the ruined yard, past the smoke, to the long, empty stretch of desert beyond. The wind carried the faint smell of burning hair and pine. He reached down, picked up a scorched photograph from the dirt, one of the Wilsons smiling on their wedding day, and tucked it carefully into his coat beside the card. Then he turned to Tommy. "Ride back with Diego. Stay close to Widow Eliza. Don't come looking for me tonight." Tommy opened his mouth, closed it, nodded. Elias mounted up slowly. The horse shifted under him, sensing the tension. He looked one last time at the dead. Then he turned the reins toward town. Behind him, the smoke kept rising, thin and black against the gray sky. And somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered, low, reluctant, like a promise nobody wanted to keep. The afternoon sun hung low over Rock Junction, turning the red cliffs into walls of fire and stretching shadows long across the dusty street. Elias Harlan sat alone on his porch, the rocking chair still beneath him for once. In his lap lay the ace of spades, its edges curled from heat and handling. He turned it over slowly, thumb tracing the ink. 3 days. Eagle? No, Deadshot. Mercy will die with you. The words had settled into him like lead shot. He didn't fold the card away. He just held it, letting the weight of it remind him what he had tried so hard to leave behind. Footsteps approached. 2 sets, one light and quick, the other heavier, more hesitant. Tommy Whitaker appeared first, hat in hand, eyes still red from the morning. Behind him came Caleb Kid Rawlins, shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep in his pockets as if he didn't trust them near a gun belt. Elias didn't look up right away. "Sit," he said quietly. Tommy dropped onto the top step. Caleb remained standing a moment longer, then lowered himself to the rail, careful not to touch the post too hard, like he might break something. Widow Eliza came last, carrying a tin pot of coffee and 3 mismatched cups on a tray. She set it on the small table beside Elias without a word, poured 3 cups and placed one in front of each of them. Her hands were steady, but when she straightened, she looked at Elias a long time. Long enough that he finally met her eyes. "You don't have to stay," he told her. "I know," she said, "but I'm staying." She took the empty tray and went back inside the house, leaving the door open behind her. The faint clink of dishes drifted out, normal sounds in a world that no longer felt normal. Tommy broke the silence first. His voice was small, cracked at the edges. "Mr. Harlan, is it true? What they're saying in town? That you're Deadshot Harlan? The one from the stories? The one who—" Elias looked at the boy. Tommy's face was a mixture of awe and fear, the same look Elias had seen on young faces 15 years ago, before the shooting started, before the badge felt heavier than iron. He didn't lie. Not this time. "Yes," he said simply. "It's true." Tommy's breath caught. He stared at Elias like he was seeing him for the first time. "Then why? Why didn't you do something sooner? In the saloon, when Cade—" "Because doing something sooner means blood," Elias said quietly. "And I've had enough of that to last 3 lifetimes." Caleb shifted on the rail. His voice was rough. "Town's talking. Say Rufus Slade sent scouts ahead. One of 'em, Silas Scar Montoya, mean son of a bitch with a derringer and a grudge. They're watching everybody now. Widow Eliza, the sheriff, even the kid here." Elias nodded once. He had felt the eyes on the street all day. Quick glances from doorways, shadows that lingered too long at corners. "They know who I am," he said. "No point hiding it anymore." He set the card down carefully on the table. Then he rose, slow, deliberate, and walked inside. The others followed without being asked. In the dim back room, an old steamer trunk sat against the wall, covered with a faded quilt. Elias knelt, pulled the quilt aside, and opened the lid. Dust rose in a soft cloud, carrying the faint smell of gun oil and oiled leather. Inside lay the gun belt, old Arizona Territorial Ranger issue, the leather still supple, the twin Colt .45s wrapped in oilcloth. He lifted the belt out, unwrapped one revolver, and ran a thumb along the barrel. No rust, no pitting, just waiting. He carried the belt back to the porch and laid it on the table beside the coffee. Tommy stared. Caleb's eyes widened, then narrowed. Elias looked at the younger man. "You said you wanted to make things right." Caleb swallowed. "I did. I do." "Then listen close." Elias picked up one of the Colts, spun the cylinder once, empty, and handed it to Caleb grip first. "Learning to shoot ain't about killing. It's about knowing when not to. When you can stop a thing before it starts. When you can walk away and still sleep at night." Caleb took the revolver. His hand shook once, then steadied. He held it like it weighed nothing and everything at once. For the first time since Elias had known him, the kid's fingers didn't twitch toward violence. They just held. Elias nodded. "Good." Tommy watched, silent, eyes moving between the gun belt and Elias's face. The old man sat again. He poured himself a cup of coffee, black and steaming, and took a slow sip. The bitterness grounded him. Outside, the street had gone quiet. No children playing, no wagons moving. Just the low murmur of voices from doorways, the occasional clatter of a shutter being latched early. Then came the sound of hooves, several horses, moving at a purposeful walk. Elias set the cup down. A group of riders appeared at the far end of the street. Leading them was a tall man in a dark coat, badge glinting on his chest, U.S. Marshal Levi Stratton. Behind him rode 4 deputies, rifles across saddles, faces grim. Stratton reined in at the foot of the porch. He touched his hat brim to Elias. "Deadshot," he said, voice carrying without shouting. "Word reached me 2 days ago. Slade's close, less than a day out now with 30 hard men at his back. He ain't just coming for you. He wants the whole town to watch you bleed, wants to prove mercy's a fool's game." Elias stood slowly. He looked down at Stratton, then past him to the street where faces had begun to appear in windows. "I know what he wants," Elias said. Stratton studied him a long moment. "We can try to meet him outside town. Keep it away from here." Elias shook his head once. "He'll burn it anyway, just to make the point." Stratton exhaled through his nose. "Then we stand. But it won't be clean." "No," Elias agreed quietly. "It won't." Stratton touched his hat again and turned his horse. The deputies followed. Hooves thudded away down the street. Elias remained standing. The ace of spades lay on the table, black against the weathered wood. Caleb still held the revolver, unloaded, steady. Tommy sat frozen on the step, staring at the gun belt like it might speak. Widow Eliza appeared in the doorway behind them, arms folded, face unreadable. Elias looked at each of them in turn. Then he reached down, picked up the gun belt, and began to buckle it on. The leather settled against his hips with a familiar weight. No one spoke. Somewhere down the street, a door slammed shut. The sun slipped lower, painting the porch in long bars of red. And in the quiet that followed, the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the desert. Low, patient, waiting, the rain came before first light on the third day, hard and sudden, turning the dusty street of Red Rock Junction into a river of mud. It hammered the tin roofs, sluiced off awnings, and filled the air with the sharp smell of wet earth and wet horseflesh. Thunder rolled low across the cliffs, not angry yet, just patient, waiting its turn. Elias Harlan stood alone in the middle of the street, coat collar turned up, hat brim dripping. Water ran in cold tracks down his neck, but he didn't move to wipe it away. The gun belt hung low on his hips, the twin Colts dark against the wet leather. He had not drawn them. Not yet. Around him, the town waited. Sheriff Josiah Kane and his deputies lined the boardwalks to the left, rifles steady but barrels low. U.S. Marshal Levi Stratton and his men held the right flank, faces grim under dripping hats. On the saloon porch, Widow Eliza stood framed in the doorway, shotgun across her arms. High in the telegraph office window, Tommy Whitaker pressed his face to the glass, knuckles white on the sill. Caleb Kid Rawlins crouched on the livery roof, rifle cradled like something fragile. And then they came. 30 riders emerged from the gray curtain of rain at the far end of the street, horses steaming, hooves churning mud into foam. At their head rode Rufus, Iron Hand Slade. 15 years in Yuma had grayed his hair to iron and twisted his hands into claws, but the silver-plated revolvers still gleamed in his grip. He reined up 50 yards out. His men fanned wide, blocking every exit. Rufus raised his voice above the downpour. "Deadshot Harlan." The words cracked like wet leather. "Come see what 15 years of practice can do." Elias didn't answer right away. He simply stood, rain streaming off his hat brim, eyes fixed on the man who had once been a badge-wearing killer and was now something worse. Rufus laughed, a harsh, barking sound, and lifted one mangled hand. 3 quick shots rang out. Bottles on the saloon rail exploded in sprays of glass and whiskey. The same showy trick Elias had once taught Caleb, but done with cruelty instead of care. "Still think mercy's strength, old man?" Rufus shouted. "Still think there's room for kindness in a world of lead?" Elias spoke then, voice carrying clear through the rain. "I think you spent 15 years learning the wrong lesson." Rufus's face twisted. He swung his arm wide. His men raised weapons, not at Elias, but at the windows, the porches, the faces peering out. Widow Eliza, Tommy, Caleb, even the deputies. "You care about these people," Rufus said, almost gentle. "That makes them weapons. Watch." He leveled his revolver at the telegraph office window, straight at Tommy. The boy froze. Rufus fired. 3 shots answered at once. Elias's Colt cleared leather in a liquid motion no one saw start. Caleb's rifle cracked from the roof. From the jail window, where Cade Blackjack Harlan had been allowed to stand with a borrowed Winchester, the 3rd shot came steady and sure. 3 streams of lead met Rufus's bullet in midair. The impact sparked bright in the rain, then the slug disintegrated into harmless fragments that pattered into the mud. Tommy ducked instinctively, but the window glass stayed whole. Rufus stared, mouth open. Elias lowered his Colt, but did not holster it. Rufus roared and fired again, this time straight at Elias's heart. The old man didn't draw the second gun. Instead, he lifted his left hand, open, palm out, as if greeting an old friend. The bullet struck true. Elias's fingers closed around it. For one impossible heartbeat, the street held its breath. Then Elias opened his hand. A flattened slug of lead dropped into the mud with a soft plop. He looked at Rufus. "Mercy," Elias said quietly, "is the hardest strength of all. because it means having the power to take a life and choosing something better. Rufus's face crumpled. His mangled hands shook. The revolver slipped from his fingers and sank into the muck. His men hesitated. A few lowered their guns. Others looked to one another, uncertain. Caleb stood on the roof, rifle still leveled, but his finger was off the trigger. Tommy pressed his forehead to the glass, tears mixing with rain. Widow Eliza stepped forward one pace, shotgun steady, a thin line of blood on her forearm from flying glass. Sheriff Kane and Marshal Stratton moved then, slow, deliberate, closing the distance. Stratton's deputies flanked Rufus's riders. No shots were fired. No blood spilled on Elias's side. Rufus sank to his knees in the mud. Rain plastered his gray hair to his skull. "You won," he whispered. Elias looked down at him. Then he turned his back, slow, deliberate, and walked away through the rain. He did not fire the killing shot. He did not need to. Marshal Stratton stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Rufus did not resist. His men threw down their weapons one by one, metal clattering into the mud. The rain kept falling. Widow Eliza lowered her shotgun. Tommy opened the telegraph office door and stepped out onto the porch, staring after Elias. Caleb climbed down from the roof, rifle slung over his shoulder, face pale but set. The town watched in silence. Faces at windows, figures in doorways, as Elias walked back toward his porch. No one cheered. No one spoke. He reached the steps, paused, and looked back once. The street was a churned sea of mud and spent brass and broken men. Rufus was being led away in irons, head bowed. Elias climbed the steps slowly. He sat in the rocker. The chair creaked once under his weight. Rain drummed on the tin roof above him. Somewhere in the distance, thunder answered. Low, final. And in the quiet that followed, Elias Harlan closed his eyes. The tremor returned to his hands. Soft, familiar, like an old friend coming home. The sun returned 3 days later, pale and tentative, as if unsure whether the town still wanted it. Red Rock Junction lay quiet under the light, the mud in the street already cracking into dry scales. Hammers rang sporadically from rooftops and porches. Men patching bullet holes in walls, women sweeping glass from boardwalks, children carrying buckets of water to wash away the dark stains that rain had only half removed. The air still carried the faint, lingering smell of wet gunpowder and scorched wood. A reminder no one could scrub out. Elias Harlan sat on his porch in the old rocker, the same one that had creaked under him for 5 quiet years. The gun belt was gone, stored back in the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth. But the weight of it lingered on his hips like a ghost. His hands rested in his lap, trembling again. Not from cold or age this time, from memory. Every tremor carried the echo of a muzzle flash, the wet slap of a bullet hitting mud, the look in Rufus Slade's eyes when the hate finally broke. He didn't rock, he just sat. Tommy Whitaker came first, hair still damp from an early bath, shirt sleeves rolled up. The boy stopped at the bottom step, hat in hand, looking older than 12. "Mr. Harlan," he said quietly. Elias lifted his eyes. "Tommy." The boy climbed the steps slowly and sat on the rail, legs dangling. For a long minute, neither spoke. The wind moved through the sagebrush beyond the street, whispering secrets no one wanted to hear. Tommy finally broke the quiet. "I keep thinking about when you caught that bullet. How'd you do it? Was it real fast or—" Elias looked down at his open palm, the one that had closed around lead, and let it fall harmless. The skin was unmarked, but he could still feel the sting, the impossible heat of it. "Someday, Tommy, he said softly. I'll show you the mechanics if you want. But first, you gotta learn what that catch really meant. Tommy waited. It wasn't about stopping the bullet, Elias continued. It was about having the strength to face the darkness, without becoming it. The boy's throat worked. He nodded once, small and solemn, then looked away toward the street where a man was nailing a new board over a shattered window. Caleb Rawlins appeared next, walking up from the livery with a rifle slung over one shoulder. Not for show, but because he'd been practicing at the edge of town since dawn. His steps were measured now, no longer the cocky swagger of a kid trying to prove something. He stopped at the porch rail, hat tipped back, eyes on Elias. Been shooting at bottles, Caleb said. Knocked 3 off without breaking them, like you showed. Elias gave the smallest nod. Caleb shifted his weight. Offer to learn. Does it still stand? For old fools who learned late? Elias studied him a long moment. The young face that had once followed Cade, Blackjack Harlan without question, now carrying lines of regret and something harder earned. He smiled then. Not wide, not triumphant. Just a quiet lifting at the corners. It stands for anyone willing to learn, Elias said. Caleb exhaled, shoulders easing a fraction. He touched his hat brim and walked away toward the practice ground behind the livery, rifle steady in his grip. Widow Eliza came last. She carried no tray this time, just a small leather-bound journal tucked under her arm. She sat in the spare chair beside Elias without asking, opened the book to a fresh page, and began to write. Slow, deliberate strokes of the pen. She didn't speak at first. She just wrote. After a while, she paused. Folks are already talking. Word spreading to Prescott, to Tombstone. Deadshot Harlan's back. Some call it a miracle. Some call it a warning. Elias stared out at the street. A woman swept her porch, glancing toward him every few strokes. Respect in her eyes, but wariness too. A man across the way touched his hat when their gazes met, then looked away quickly. I never wanted to be back, Elias said quietly. I know. Eliza closed the journal. But you are. And the town's different now. Not peaceful like before. But alive in a way it wasn't. She stood, touched his shoulder once. Light, brief. And went back inside. Elias remained seated. The sun climbed higher, warming the porch boards. His hands trembled in his lap, soft and persistent. He didn't try to still them. They were his now. The tremor of a man who had carried too much for too long. Down the street, Tommy ran to catch up with Caleb, calling something about bottles and aim. The two disappeared around the corner, voices fading into the ordinary sounds of a town stitching itself back together. Elias leaned back. The rocker creaked once. He thought of Rufus on his knees in the mud. He thought of the Wilsons lined up against their own fence. He thought of the badge he'd left behind, the lives he'd taken before he learned there was another way. None of it was gone. It lived in the tremor, in the silences between words, in the way people looked at him now. Not as an old man on a porch, but as something more dangerous and more necessary. He closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. A door banged shut. A child laughed. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary morning. But the air still carried the faint, stubborn scent of rain and gunsmoke. And Elias Harlan sat there, hands trembling, waiting for whatever came next. Not as a legend returned, just as a man who had chosen and would keep choosing the harder road. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths. Some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us. subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.